Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Toto Wolff continues his absolutely relentless pursuit of Max Verstappen's signature to replace Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes next year, emphatically declaring that at the moment it is not Red Bull that are winning races, it is purely down to the talent of Max Verstappen. And based on the comment of Max over the weekend, he seemingly agrees with this assessment. If Toto Wolff and Max themselves are convinced that he would win with any car that was reasonably competitive towards the front of the field, he may well decide, if the long-term prospects of Merc are better than Red Bull, to make that move now, especially given Toto is absolutely intending to make this happen. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, a fair few things to say on the state of the driver market. Sergio Rodriguez confirming what we've all known for some time. Ollie Bearman will be going to Haas. Now, he hasn't said it like this. British flag, Bear, American flag. Ollie Bearman's going to Haas. Now, I know there's been lots of talk about Bearman and most certainly about Antonelli over the last few rounds because their Formula 2 campaign is in shambles. Now, let me just kind of paint the picture of this a little bit because people talk about this a lot, and I feel like the people that talk about this a lot of the time don't even really watch Formula 2 to understand exactly what's been going on as of late. But nonetheless, Ollie Bearman was in one race, of course, in Formula 1. He replaced Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari back in Jeddah. He is still 12th in the standings. He is 16th in the Formula 2 standings, despite having raced in the vast majority of those championship rounds so far this season. Last year, Bearman in his rookie season in F2 was really impressive in the Prema. Many incredibly impressive race results, multiple race wins, pole positions, etc, etc. This year, he's been struggling big time, as of course has his teammate Andrea Kimi Antonelli, who is heavily linked to Mercedes. So this is the talk right now. Bearman and Antonelli were meant to be this year a real, force to be reckoned with in Formula 2 as a duo. Both of their championships have just been basically terrible from day one, with relatively few signs of life from either side. So what's going on here, right? Bearman has had an incredibly impressive junior career, has impressed Ferrari, has impressed Haas every time he's been in a Formula 1 car. The same applies to Antonelli, dominated basically every championship he's raced in, even some races, I think German Formula 4, whatever it was, he missed a round, still won the championship by miles, won the Italian F1 championship by miles. This is Kimi Antonelli I'm talking about here, of course, linked to Mercedes, won Frecker at the first time of asking, into Formula 2 and has kind of been nowhere, right? So what is more likely, that both simultaneously, Bearman and Antonelli, despite all the promising things they've done so far in their career, the fact that every single time Antonelli and Bearman get in a Formula 1 car, the teams are like, wow, this guy's really good, and impresses them every single time. Is that more likely that they've both simultaneously fallen off and are no longer good drivers? Or is it far more likely, which I believe it is, that Prema, given the fact that this year the Formula 2 cars have changed substantially, have just really struggled to get to grips with these new generation of Formula 2 cars? That's why F2 is just not the be-all and end-all for these teams or for these drivers. The reality is the teams know that Bearman's good. Based on their experiences when Bearman has been in a Formula 1 car, the same applies to Antonelli. And if you watch the Formula 2 race this past weekend in Spain, the Prema seemed borderline undrivable, so much understeer, the tyre deg was atrocious, and actually Antonelli, if anything, has been comprehensively outperforming Bearman over the last few rounds, which probably says something as to why Antonelli is so highly rated by Mercedes, and he will get that seat if Max Verstappen doesn't go there. And that's what we're going to discuss in the coming minutes. But Bearman to Haas is basically a done deal. I think, if I'm another Formula 2 driver, I'm thinking, damn, these guys aren't even doing that well. They're still getting a drive in F1. Like, what more do I have to do? But, unfortunately, the feeder series into Formula 1 do, I would say, leave something to be desired in terms of really being, good proof that the drivers are properly ready. Carlos Sainz, by the way, said in his story, see you again in 2025. So obviously, as Seppa says, he's not going to be in the stands, is he? He's going to be driving somewhere. The confusing thing is about Sainz is that this past weekend's, we were pretty convinced. The journalists were pretty convinced. A couple of journalists even literally made a statement publicly to say, hey, big announcement coming today, guys. You won't guess what it is. And basically everyone thought that Sainz to Williams was going to get confirmed. For some reason, they postponed that, and Sainz to Williams was not yet confirmed. Although, given the fact that everyone seemed to think in the paddock it was getting confirmed on the Saturday or the Sunday, surely that's a done deal. Surely the contract is signed. But now there's still some questions on that because there's now rumours that Flavio Briatore and Alpine, they're trying to come into the race. So who knows what's actually happening there. But the fact that there was seemingly an announcement ready to be made that then didn't happen for some reason, definitely a little bit confusing what's going to happen going forwards. Speaking of Ferrari, this is a bit of concern for them, right? Because McLaren arguably right now have the fastest car, and we're going to discuss that on the max point in a second. Ferrari will like to think they should really be having the fastest car at this point, but Barcelona was just not that good for them. They brought upgrades, and the upgrades have increased the load of the car, increasing the peak downforce they can generate. But the age-old problem of these relegations seems to have re-emerged, that it triggers the extra load bouncing in the corners, as in, porpoising is kind of back, not on the straights, more so in the corners. This is a problem that Mercedes have dealt with for years at this point, and Ferrari, they've tried to maximize the downforce, but maybe they don't fully understand the platform of their car as they would like to, because now the drivers are saying, even on a pretty smooth circuit like Barcelona, that they got bouncing in the corners, and this seemed to be a problem for Ferrari when they ramped up the engines. They were actually very competitive, Ferrari, during the practice sessions when the engines were turned down. When they turned the engines up, a couple of corners, they obviously had more kph entry speed into the corners, and that was creating some bouncing. So the thing is, for Ferrari, in practice, they're probably going to continue to be very strong. When it comes to qualifying, their car just doesn't seem to be able to quite execute and deliver the performance potential that is there due to a couple of limitations when it's running absolutely flat out. So Vasseurs got something to think about. The Ferrari drivers have something to think about, because Leclerc is no longer second in the Drivers' Championship. That position now belongs to Lando Norris, and so does, the likes of Lewis Hamilton and the likes of Adrian Newey, because he potentially might join the team and need to solve some of these problems. Here was Newey, by the way, his wife Amanda. Adrian told you that he was tired and needed a holiday, and here he is. Now he's got his Forrest Gump t-shirt on. Of course, these are all the quotes that he was giving, right, when he decided to step away from Red Bull, and he was making the point, it's okay, I'm going to take a bit of a break, but the feeling is that he is probably going to return. At least that's the rumour. And even Aston Martin, they were asked for comment on the Newey rumours, and they said, yeah, it's good to be in the race with Ferrari. So they basically were obviously there's conversations being had between Ferrari and Newey and Aston Martin and Newey, and there were some rumours that it's already a done deal. Time will tell on that. Let's talk Red Bull real quick, because Max Verstappen in Canada had a power unit issue early on in the weekends. Turns out that having this gone back to Honda and tested it out, it doesn't seem recoverable. At least no news on this is probably bad news, because Honda haven't said that, it's fine. They haven't said anything. So the rumor is that probably this new engine that was just in the car has had a failure, and therefore they've lost one of the power units. Now, it's pretty funny because they haven't lost a power unit, right? They know where it is, but it's failed, and therefore it's probably not going to come back, which means that Max will require a new kind of, power unit at some point, the parts that failed. Probably not the end of the world. They're probably going to take it in Spa like they usually do, and Max will go from, P11 or P14 or P18, wherever he potentially ends up qualifying, or back of the grid, to probably win the race anyway. But we've seen something similar to that when he started from P14 back in 2022 and won within about 20 laps or so. It was very clear who the winner was going to be. Maybe that won't be the case this time, but nonetheless, Max will be forced to take penalties, we think, at some point. The same is probably also true, at least for Ferrari, but McLaren, we're not so sure exactly how their components are looking for the rest of the season. Bit of drama at Mercedes as well. If you guys have followed the team this weekend, the big storyline going into the weekend really was about this whole sabotage rumour. There was an email that apparently emerged from within Mercedes that basically said the team is sabotaging Hamilton. They're putting him on cooler tyres than George Russell, and this is a massive safety risk for not just Hamilton but for the other drivers, deliberately, bringing lower tyre temperatures. Now, no one really knew whether this email was true or not, although there was some reports saying that actually they'd heard third-party evidence that yes, there was some element of truth here, but the fact of the matter is we just don't really know. Mercedes called the police, though, to say, hey, can you investigate where this has come from? The allegations and all this stuff. So, you can argue whether bringing the police in was more like a speculative gesture, just for public perception, rather than actually expecting anything to happen. But the police have looked into it and said they found no criminal offences to have been committed. So, yeah, seems like nothing really, to say on this from Mercedes' side, although Toto Wolff did continue to comment on it and said the following, that the podium in Spain will silence the conspiracists, the people that have said that Mercedes have been systematically knocking Hamilton down in some respects. I think the problem is for Toto, in some sense it does the opposite, right? Because going into the weekends, the email comes around, Hamilton makes the comment in Montreal about the tyre temps not being up to scratch in qualifying, sticks it P3 just ahead of George Russell, out-qualifies George Russell, out-races George Russell in the ends. Okay, different strategies, but if Hamilton's tyre wear wasn't as good as it was, he wouldn't have been able to go to the softs at the end of the Grand Prix. So I think once again, Russell's more aggressive, shall we say, nature on the tyres meant that Hamilton did have a faster overall race time. But I think for Toto, it's like, well, actually, doesn't that potentially say the opposite? Like, it all became public, assuming that there is some truth to this, which there may not be, but let's just say there is. All the information around this sabotage becomes public, and then, realistically, Mercedes can't keep going with it if they were doing it at that point. And then the one weekend's post-email, all of a sudden, Hamilton's, back on the podium, right? So it's sure, Mercedes weren't kind of sabotaging him this weekend's, but obviously people that believe the rumours about this will say, well, obviously, because you guys got caught and therefore you stopped and therefore you got a podium, right? So it's kind of difficult to win if you're Mercedes, but at the same time, if I'm Lewis Hamilton, I'm not especially happy with the state of the team, and I think that I'm still happy if I'm Lewis that I'm leaving for Ferrari. Yes, Mercedes outperformed Ferrari over the last couple of weekends. I'm not sure I'm expecting that to continue necessarily next year and the year after, and there are still more questions to be answered here, but as we can see, the biggest lap time improvement from Spain to Spain year on year is obviously McLaren, then RB, despite having a pretty rough weekend. Ferrari, Williams, Mercedes are up here. Red Bull, 6/10 improvement. Alpine, of course, the least improvement, as with Aston Martin over the last year or so. But Red Bull have not improved as much as you might expect as some of the other teams have. But certainly on a race-to-race basis, we have now started to see that, Mercedes really taking the upper hand. These are points scored over the last several weekends. McLaren at 113, Mercedes at 87, Ferrari at 83. Red Bull are at 91, but 83 of those 91 points are from Max Verstappen. So this is the thing. In the constructors, McLaren have closed the gap, but Perez has done basically nothing to add to that. And this is why the talk is now once again back on Max Verstappen, because is Red Bull right now the fastest car? That is a matter for debate. Quite arguably, no. Are they still the best team in terms of strategy, in terms of operations? They barely ever make a strategy mistake. Their pit stops are basically flawless. If they're ever struggling with a setup in the early part of practice, they will almost always get it right come qualifying and make the right decisions. So I think even if McLaren right now have the fastest car, even if Mercedes have a very competitive car and Ferrari do as well, if I'm Max, part of my decision must be related to the fact the Red Bull operationally still seem like the strongest outfit. But then again, Newey has departed. Zak Brown has made it quite clear that he expects others to depart as well. There is clearly still some internal turmoil there. Jos Verstappen, Max's father, made it very clear that he doesn't like Christian Horner and he would probably prefer Max were to leave if there was a viable alternative. Horner's talking about, Max hates losing, that's how it should be, and, obviously just giving a lot of praise to Max to try and make him stay at Red Bull. And it's interesting what's happened over the last couple of weeks. I will say that Kelly PK, Max's girlfriend, has been doing some interesting liking here on social media, because Zak Brown, you guys may remember, made this statement a few weeks ago where he said, basically the Red Bull is so good that 6 or 7 drivers would win, the championship, be world champions with the Red Bull. As great as Max is, I don't think he would win the world championship in any car other than the Red Bull at this point. Now, I think in hindsight, you might think, well, it's difficult to win a championship in a car that isn't the fastest. And over the last few rounds, there is an argument to say Max has scored the majority of points, won the majority of races, but he hasn't had the fastest car. He's capitalized on mistakes from others and executed basically flawless races week in, week out. And he's obviously performing at a ridiculously high level, certainly when you compare it to Sergio Perez, for example. This is Zak Brown looking a bit frustrated, to say the very least, about the result in Spain at this past weekend. And Kelly PK straight up likes this post, so it seems like there might be something in that. But however good you think Max is, however much extra performance is able to to extract from the Red Bull that other drivers may not necessarily be able to. Toto is continuing the love affair to try and get Verstappen to the silver arrows. Toto says the following: Max is the one that wins the races. It is not Red Bull, effectively not Red Bull any longer. Horner said that he will stay at Red Bull. Let's see. We leave him with this idea. So it's quite clear that Mercedes have planted in the mind of Max Verstappen the possibility of leaving to go to Mercedes. Helmut Marko has also said that we believe at the very least if Marko were to leave the team and were to decide to leave or to get fired, it would open a clause in Verstappen's contract where he is simply allowed to walk away before the 2028 deadline. And actually, Marko said at the time that he will not stand in Verstappen's way. So if Max makes up his mind that he wants to leave to Mercedes, it will happen. There's no doubt it will happen. It's just whether Max makes that decision or not. We need to allow Lewis and George to finish the season at a high level, and that's kind of why Toto is saying, look, we're not going to push Max anymore. We've given him the idea. We want him. It's now on him to make a decision. We can bide our time a little bit, and then we'll see if the W15 will be a car that can convince Max. And to be fair, if I'm Max, a few races ago, at the start of the season, when the major beef was happening with Christian Horner or the allegations, and Mercedes and Toto were saying, hey, you might want to come over here, guys, or Max or Jos or whatever, get the team coming to Mercedes instead. Seems like a ludicrous idea because Mercedes seem to be going backwards and in a downward spiral. All of a sudden, here we are a few races later, and Mercedes are on the up. Now, maybe you can argue that Mercedes could put together an absolute tractor and it would still do well in Barcelona because it seems to be a great circuit for them. But, you know, it's 2 weekends in a row. Even Imola wasn't too bad in the grand scheme of things. Neither was Monaco. And here we go, Montreal on pole position, and then double podium, 3-4 once again here in the last weekend in Spain. So there's clearly some arguments that, yes, the Mercedes is a couple of tenths of a second off where the Red Bull and the McLaren presently are. But Mercedes is definitely a more compelling prospect now than it was a few rounds ago, and as Toto says, I think it's Max who wins the races and not Red Bull. The RB20 is solid. Perez isn't doing well. It is Max who makes all of the difference. And, you know, even Max himself basically said this, saying that, look, the gap with Checo is big. He's not got any worse. I think that says a lot. I've got to drive at 101% every time, and as and when I do, things can go wrong. He also basically said, look, I'm extracting more from this car than anybody else could. I think he made the point a few rounds ago as well. There was like, I challenge anyone on the planet to drive my car and get more out of it than I. So the feeling I think that Max has, the feeling that maybe Horner has, the feeling that Toto Wolff has, whether you believe this to be true or not, is that Max is the fastest driver by some way on the grid and would be able to win races and maybe even championships in a car that might not quite be the fastest. You know, it would have to be close to the fastest for any driver to win a championship given the competition at the top of Formula One. But you know, the feeling is that with a car that isn't necessarily the best, it could be possible. I mean, we see it here in Spain when, I mean, certainly on the race pace data, given that Norris was stuck in traffic, he did have the fastest car. Like, he was the fastest man on track, but he got held up in that first stint, which cost him dearly because of the poor start with respect to Max and, of course, with respect to George Russell as well. The race pace was as follows: about half a second to Sergio Perez was how fast Max was lapping with comparison to his teammate. This was also an interesting statement that was made. And again, it's easy when Max is absolutely dominating to speculate how good he is. You never really get to know or to see it over the last couple of years. But over the last few rounds, I think we've got more of a sense as to how, you know, just efficient and ruthless Max is at getting the most out of his cars. And even Andrew Benson, BBC top guy really from the journalism side, says that if you walk around the paddock and talk to the team bosses, I've had a couple of very senior people in F1 tell me this year, I think Verstappen has 2 or 3 tenths on everybody as a driver. Now, I'm not sure I'd go that far, but I think there is an argument that Max has, you know, half a tenth on the entire field right now. But if there are certain team bosses that believe Max is so good that effectively he can make up an entire sizable upgrade chunk on the entire field based on how good this guy is as a driver, then, you know, the argument is made that if Verstappen is worth 2 or 3 tenths on his own, then Max in the Mercedes would be winning races. And you can argue that he might have won Montreal in the Mercedes. I don't think he would have won Spain in the Mercedes, but, you know, there is an argument there to at least be considered, given some speculation on exactly how much it is Max and how much it is the car. But whatever you guys think on this story, there is absolutely no doubt that Mercedes are going to try, and they've told Max, hey, we're we're interested, we're going to make this happen, it's going to happen at some point, it's now on you to tell us when you want to do it, because the other key piece really is the 2026 angle, right? The fact that sure, Red Bull right now, better operationally, better car still than a Mercedes, obviously, but in 2026 might be a different story. And if Max still thinks he can win next year's championship in a car that isn't the Red Bull, such as the Mercedes W16, if it continues to progress as it is, then why not give that a go next year for Mercedes and then hit the ground running in 2026 with what is believed to be a far more competitive project than Red Bull are currently putting together. But very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final thing. Last year, there were something like over 1,000 track limits violations over the course of the weekends. There were like 83 lap times deleted in Austria. It kind of, well, it lives rent-free in my head. These are brand new gravel traps on the track, just to the outside. Honestly, this is pretty good going, to be fair. It's not gravel all the way to the side, but it's quite clear that if you dip your wheel in the gravel, it ain't going to end well. So, yeah, there's new gravel, turn 9, turn 10, to limit the potential of the track limits violations we saw last year. This is the correct solution, and it is a solution that will no doubt be effective. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.